Daniel and Laura were a hopeful black couple who had just moved to a peaceful suburban neighborhood. They had spent many years working hard to achieve their dream of owning a cozy home where their 2 children could grow up in a safe and friendly environment. As they stepped into their new house, with its freshly painted walls still carrying a faint scent, Laura couldn't help but smile. Feeling excitement spread through every corner. After settling in, Daniel and Laura decided to host a welcoming barbecue party to connect with their neighbors. They wanted to build new relationships, share joy, and spread optimism. Daniel spent the entire morning preparing perfectly seasoned barbecue meats, while Laura arranged side dishes and decorated the garden with twinkling string lights. As the evening came, the aroma of grilled meat wafted from their backyard, catching the attention of some neighbors. The first to arrive were the Johnsons, a young couple with their little daughter. They cheerfully struck up a conversation. And soon, the atmosphere became more lively as more families joined in. Laughter, like music, and conversations gradually connected everyone. However, not all the neighbors were enthusiastic about the new family's arrival. Mrs. Emma, a longtime resident of the neighborhood, stood by her window, watching Daniel and Laura's backyard with a displeased expression. Mrs. Emma had lived here for over 30 years and was resistant to change. Deep-seated racial prejudices made her feel uneasy seeing a black family move in. She didn't want to join the party. Instead, she called the police, complaining about the noise. When the police car pulled up in front of Daniel and Laura's house, the party was at its peak. The music abruptly stopped, and everyone turned their heads toward the front yard. 2 police officers got out of the car, and one of them approached Daniel. "We've received a complaint about noise," the officer said, his tone somewhat stern. Daniel, after a moment of surprise, calmly stepped forward and pulled out his badge. "I am Daniel Thompson, the new chief of police for this city," he said, looking the officer straight in the eye. This revelation stunned not only the officer but also the neighbors. The tense atmosphere seemed to dissolve, replaced by surprise and a touch of embarrassment on a few faces. Mrs. Emma stood from afar, her hand gripping the window frame, speechless. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. The police chief, the family she had thought didn't belong in the neighborhood, now had someone leading the police force. A whirlwind of emotions arose within her: prejudice, surprise, and a bit of shame. Despite the incident, Daniel and Laura continued to live with an open and optimistic spirit. They didn't let the event affect their desire to connect with the community. Instead, they became even more determined to prove that they were part of the neighborhood and were willing to contribute to building an inclusive and united community. In the days following, Mrs. Emma couldn't stop thinking about her actions. She began to reflect on the deeply ingrained prejudices within her. And images of the party, of Daniel and Laura with their sincere smiles, kept appearing in her mind. A change, however small, had begun to sprout in the heart of the elderly woman. The story of the barbecue party and the appearance of the new police chief spread throughout the neighborhood. It became a moment for everyone to reflect on unity, on overcoming prejudice to build a better community. Conversations began to happen, not only among neighbors but also between generations within families. People started to understand that diversity was strength. And only when we opened our hearts could we truly understand and connect with one another. Daniel and Laura, with their patience and love, gradually changed not only the neighborhood but also the hearts of those living around them. And Mrs. Emma, who once stood outside her window with a resentful gaze, eventually stepped out of her threshold to join the community with a more open heart. As time passed, the relationship between Daniel's family and their neighbors gradually grew stronger. Daniel and Laura frequently organized small gatherings, from morning coffee sessions to outdoor movie nights on weekends. They always invited everyone to join and created a friendly, Joyful atmosphere. The children in the neighborhood began to play together. And Daniel and Laura's home became a central hub for fun activities. The laughter of children echoed throughout the yard, creating a lively and warm atmosphere. One autumn afternoon, with leaves falling all over the yard, Mrs. Emma decided to walk over to Daniel and Laura's house. She brought with her a homemade apple pie, as a gesture of reconciliation. When Laura opened the door, she couldn't hide her surprise at seeing Mrs. Emma standing there, holding the still warm pie. "I wanted to apologize for what happened before. And thank you for bringing so much life to this neighborhood," Mrs. Emma said, her voice trembling but sincere. Laura smiled, her eyes filled with empathy, and invited Mrs. Emma inside. The two women sat together, sharing stories about life, hardships, and joys. Barriers gradually dissolved, and a new friendship began to blossom. Daniel also continued his efforts to build trust and respect among the neighbors. He participated in the neighborhood's volunteer activities, helped families in need, and was always willing to listen to everyone's concerns. He knew that his role was not just as a police chief but also as a neighbor, a friend, and an essential part of the community. One day, the neighborhood organized a small winter festival, with a beautifully decorated Christmas tree in the communal park. Everyone gathered, bringing homemade food and drinks. For the first time in years, Mrs. Emma contributed a small stall selling apple pies and cookies she had made herself. Nearby, Daniel and Laura organized a small game for the children, and laughter echoed throughout the space. In the sparkling lights of the Christmas tree, Mrs. Emma stood watching everyone with a warm expression. She saw Daniel holding his little daughter on his shoulders, Laura standing beside him with a radiant smile, and the neighbors gathering around each other. She realized that change wasn't always easy, but it could bring about better things. Her long-held prejudices had gradually been replaced by understanding and affection. For their part, Daniel and Laura felt happy and grateful to have found a real community. They understood that building trust and love was not something that could happen overnight. But with patience and an open heart, anything was possible. They chose love, and that love had transformed the neighborhood. In the following years, the neighborhood became more connected. Gatherings, communal meals, and community activities were not just opportunities for fun but also opportunities for understanding and bonding. The story of Daniel and Laura, starting from a simple barbecue party, became a symbol of unity and compassion. It reminded everyone that only when we dared to step out of our prejudices could we truly connect and love one another. And Mrs. Emma, now a beloved grandmother figure to all the children in the neighborhood, often told them stories about life, the lessons she had learned, and how a barbecue party had changed her life. The children listened with fascination, understanding that love and empathy could overcome any barrier. Daniel and Laura, with hopeful hearts, not only found a new home but also a larger family, where everyone loved and supported each other. And this small neighborhood, once peaceful but somewhat closed off, had now become a community full of love and diversity, where everyone felt they belonged. When spring arrived, the neighborhood began organizing more outdoor activities. One Saturday morning, Daniel and Laura, along with their neighbors, organized a community gardening day, where everyone worked together to plant flowers and greenery in the communal park. It was a sunny morning, and the atmosphere was filled with joy as everyone worked together. The children ran around, helping the adults water plants and move soil, laughter filling the air. Mrs. Emma, with her gardening gloves on, eagerly instructed the children on how to plant flowers properly. Everyone worked together, shared stories about their families and lives, and felt like they were part of a big family. After the gardening session, Everyone gathered under the shade of large old trees. Daniel and Laura brought a large cooler filled with refreshing lemonade and homemade cookies. Mrs. Emma also brought apple pie. And she sat with other mothers, sharing stories about her past. About the changes she had witnessed over the years living in the neighborhood. Mrs. Emma's stories were not just about the past but also about the lessons she had learned about love and understanding. The children sat around, listening with curious eyes. One little boy asked Mrs. Emma, "Did you ever think we shouldn't play together because we have different skin colors?" Mrs. Emma sighed softly, then smiled. "Yes. I used to think that way. But I was wrong. I've learned that skin color doesn't matter. What matters is our hearts and how we treat each other." Daniel sat beside her, looking at Mrs. Emma with affection. He knew that her change hadn't been easy. But she had bravely stepped out of her prejudices. And that was truly admirable. Daniel stood up, raised his glass of lemonade, and said, "I want to make a toast to this community. To all of us. We've overcome barriers together. And now we're a family. Thank you all for welcoming us and for creating a loving community." Everyone raised their glasses. And cheers echoed throughout the park. Laughter and conversations continued well into the afternoon. The gardening session not only made the park greener but also strengthened the bonds between everyone. Daniel and Laura felt happy seeing everyone gathered together. And they knew that moving here was one of the best decisions of their lives. In the days that followed, the neighborhood grew even more lively with plans for upcoming activities. Laura proposed organizing a communal picnic in the nearby woods, where everyone could grill together and have outdoor games. The entire neighborhood was excited about the idea. And preparations for the picnic began. The women worked together to plan the food, while the men prepared equipment for grilling and organizing games. On the day of the picnic, the small forest became bustling with laughter and music. The children ran around, playing tag and hide-and-seek among the green trees. Daniel and a few other neighbors set up a large tent for everyone to rest in the shade. Laura and some of the other mothers prepared the food. And the aroma of grilled meat spread throughout the area. Mrs. Emma sat under a tree, watching the children play, and felt a sense of peace. She realized that since Daniel and Laura had moved in, she had changed a lot. In the past, she had always lived with prejudice and isolation. But now, she had opened her heart and found new joy. She felt younger. And she knew that it was love and understanding that had made it happen. After the picnic, everyone gathered around. And Daniel proposed having a storytelling session by the campfire. Everyone sat in a circle. And each person shared their stories one by one. Some talked about childhood memories. Others shared the challenges they had overcome. When it was Mrs. Emma's turn, she talked about her life, the changes she had gone through, and how Daniel and Laura had helped her realize the true meaning of love and community. "We all have moments of fear and doubt," Mrs. Emma said, her voice warm. "But if we dare to open our hearts and step out of our comfort zones, we'll find that there are many wonderful things waiting for us. I've learned that nothing is more important than love and connection between people." Laura sat beside Daniel, holding his hand. And both felt moved by Mrs. Emma's words. They knew that while life had its challenges, with love and unity, they could overcome anything. The campfire ended with songs and laughter. And everyone left with hearts full of joy and hope. In the months that followed, the neighborhood continued to grow closer and more united. Everyone helped each other through hardships, from winter storms to small day-to-day issues. Daniel, in his role as police chief, was always ready to lend a hand. And he felt proud seeing his community grow stronger and more united. Laura also played an active role in building the community. She joined the school parents' committee, organized fundraisers, and activities for the children. She wanted to ensure that not only her children but all the kids in the neighborhood had a happy childhood full of opportunities. She, along with other mothers, organized outdoor learning sessions, teaching the kids about nature, love, and respect for everyone. One day, while Daniel was patrolling the neighborhood, he saw Mrs. Emma sitting on a bench in front of her house, watching the children play. He stopped, walked over, and sat down beside her. Mrs. Emma smiled, looking at Daniel with a warm expression. "You know, Daniel," Mrs. Emma said, her voice gentle, "I've lived here for over 30 years. And I've never been as happy as I am now. You and Laura have brought us joy, love, and unity. Thank you for helping me see what's truly important in life." Daniel smiled, placing a hand on Mrs. Emma's shoulder. "We're all part of this community. And I'm so grateful that you opened your heart. You've taught us a lot. And we love you very much." Mrs. Emma nodded. And the two of them sat there, watching the children play, feeling the peace and joy spreading through the air. Daniel knew that although life could bring challenges, with love and unity, they could overcome anything and build a truly worthy community. The story of Daniel, Laura, and Mrs. Emma was not just a story about a barbecue party but a story about love, change, and the power of community. It was a testament that only when we dared to step out of our comfort zones could we truly understand and connect with one another. And in doing so, we would see that nothing was more important than love and understanding among people.